My sister stole my husband, but I invited my boyfriend to the family dinner, knowing it would make my ex uncomfortable. I know how it sounds. The title of this video is terrible, but it is the truth. I knew that bringing Jake, my boyfriend, and Emily, his daughter, to my mother's birthday party might make some people uncomfortable. But I never thought it would turn into a full-blown family war. To begin with, Jake is the best thing that has happened to me in the last 2 years. We met when I was working as Emily's babysitter. She was 5 years old at the time and I was 20. Jake had lost his wife and was raising his daughter alone. I lived just 2 streets away from his house, so taking care of her was the most practical thing to do. But I never imagined it would lead us here. Nowadays, we live together. Emily calls me her second mom, and I would do anything for her. So when my mom asked me to bring them to her birthday party, I did not hesitate. She loves them. But when my sister, Sarah, 35, and her husband, Brian, 33, found out, everything changed. Sarah grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. "You are so selfish," she hissed angrily. "What?" I blinked, completely confused. "You know that bringing Jake here will make my husband uncomfortable." Of course, I knew her husband very well. He was my ex-husband. We had been married for 5 years when everything fell apart. I thought we had a stable life, but I was wrong. My sister, my own sister, had spent years whispering in his ear that he deserved better, that I was boring, that I did not make him happy. And one day, out of nowhere, he asked me for a divorce. Weeks later, they were together, and the family accepted it as if nothing had happened. Crossing my arms, I looked at her in disbelief. "I know your husband better than you do. I know his traumas, his insecurities, his problems. I was married to him, remember?" Sarah stiffened. "That is exactly why you should be more understanding," she said through gritted teeth. I let out a humorless laugh. "Understanding? Yes. His father cheated on his mother with the nanny and destroyed their family. He grew up with that trauma, and now you are bringing your boyfriend here, knowing that your story is exactly the same. That was when I understood everything." "Excuse me?" I said, stunned. "What story are you talking about?" "Jake lost his wife. There was no cheating. There was no betrayal. But the trauma is still there, and you are forcing him to relive it." Anger surged through my body. "Look, my boyfriend is part of my life. He is part of this family. And if your husband has a problem with that, it is his problem." I swung the door open and walked back to Jake and Emily, who were chatting with my mother. At first, everything at the party seemed fine. My mom hugged Jake, kissed Emily, and started showing her the plants in the garden. But it did not take long for me to notice the looks my sister and her husband were giving us. They sat at the far end of the table, whispering to each other and making sarcastic remarks from time to time. Jake noticed it too. "Ignore them," he whispered, squeezing my hand. I wanted to listen to him. I really did. But after dinner, everything exploded. "This is disgusting," my ex-husband suddenly said, glaring at us. "How can you sleep at night knowing you betrayed your wife's memory?" Silence. Jake stood up. Emily clung to his arm, her big eyes filled with confusion. "Do not talk like that in front of my daughter." His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with fury. I stood up as well. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I snapped. "Jake has done nothing to you. I have done nothing to you." My sister jumped in. "And yet you brought them here knowing how my husband feels?" I felt rage explode in my chest. "Them? What are you even saying? Jake and Emily are my family. Or have you already forgotten that you destroyed my marriage?" My sister went pale. My ex-husband stiffened. My mother tried to defuse the situation, but it was too late. Jake looked at me and spoke in a low voice. "Take Emily to the car. Let me handle this." His tone was too calm, too dangerous. I grabbed Emily and walked out of the house. But the real fight was just beginning. The air outside was freezing, or maybe it just felt that way because my skin was burning with rage. I took Emily's hand and walked quickly to the car, trying to ignore the trembling in my fingers. My sister and my ex-husband were the worst possible combination, and I had been naive enough to think they could behave. Emily climbed into the back seat and looked at me with those big, questioning eyes. Why was Uncle saying those things? She asked, her little voice trembling. I swallowed hard. I did not want her to feel even a hint of guilt because she had nothing to do with this. She was just a child caught in the hatred of petty adults. Do not listen to them, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. Sometimes people say mean things when they are upset, but that does not mean they are right. She did not look convinced, but she nodded and lowered her gaze to her wrist, where she wore a beaded bracelet we had made together. In the distance, the front door slammed shut. My sister and my ex-husband had just lost control, and Jake was still inside, caught in the middle of it all. I bit my lip. Jake was not the type to start a fight, but he was not the kind to let himself be walked over either. And my ex-husband had always been a coward disguised as a man of principles. The minutes dragged by slowly, and finally, I saw Jake walk out the door. His expression was unreadable, but his posture said it all. Tense shoulders, firm steps, a cold fury that did not show on his face but lingered in the air. He opened the car door and got in without a word. Everything okay? I asked even though I already knew the answer. Let's go was all he said. I started the car and drove away. The silence was heavy as I drove. Emily fell asleep before we even left the neighborhood, and when I glanced at Jake, I saw him staring blankly at the road. What happened? He sighed but did not look at me. Your sister outdid herself this time. It was not just about me. It was about you. My chest tightened. I knew my sister despised me, but hearing those words from Jake made it hurt even more. What did she say? Jake ran a hand down his face and rested his elbow on the window. She said it is unfair that you always land on your feet. That no matter what happens, you always find a way to move forward while she has to fight for everything. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course, the eternal victim. She went after Emily. The anger in Jake's voice sent a chill down my spine. What? Jake clenched his jaw. She said you are raising another woman's daughter as if she were your own. That no matter how much you love her, you will never be her mother. For a moment, I could not breathe. I knew my sister could be cruel, but I never imagined she would go that far. Emily was not just another woman's daughter. She was my daughter too. Not by blood but by love. I stayed silent. There was no reasoning with someone who was obsessed with making me miserable. But what Jake said next made me shudder. Do you know why your ex-husband was really so uncomfortable? I looked at him intently. Because he knows he made a mistake. A shiver ran down my spine. What? Jake turned his head and looked at me for the first time during the entire drive. Because he is afraid of me. Because when he saw you with me, he saw everything he lost. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. No, my ex-husband was never the type to regret anything. He took what he wanted and moved on. But what if this time was different? I know because he told me. Jake continued. He looked me in the eye and admitted it. He said he finally understands what he had with you. Suddenly, the car felt too small. Well, that is too bad, I said in a tense voice, because he will never have the chance to get it back. Jake barely smiled, but there was something deeper in his eyes. He knew this battle was far from over, and he was right. The phone almost slipped out of my hands. Jake, Rich. The sound of my aunt's voice became a distant echo. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear what she was saying. How did I not see it before? Every conversation, every moment together. Jake never mentioned money, not even once. Memories began to fall into place. His complete ease with expenses, his relaxed attitude toward any payment, the way he never hesitated to take me out to dinner or buy things for Emily. It was not just generosity. It was the behavior of someone who did not have to worry about money at all. And he had hidden it from me. The heat of anger surged through my chest like a flame. I trusted him. I loved him. And he had lied to me. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that my sister had known before I did. She knew. And she used that information to humiliate me. Her disdainful looks, her taunts about how I always land on my feet. It all made sense now. It was not hate. It was fear. Because while she clung to a man who was never worth it, I, without even trying, had found someone better. My jaw tightened. This was not just a betrayal. This was a declaration of war. The first blow was not the message. It was the call from my boss, hours later. He asked me to come to his office. His tone was professional but distant. When I arrived, he closed the door and slid his phone across the table. On the screen were screenshots of social media posts, anonymous messages claiming I was a toxic person, that I had ruined marriages, and that my presence at the company was a problem. It did not take much to figure out where it came from. My sister had crossed a line. I do not know what is going on in your personal life, but this is not the image we want in the company, my boss said, his hands clasped together on the desk. The anger was replaced by absolute coldness. Are you implying that I should resign? His gaze shifted away. He did not have the courage to say it out loud, but the pressure was there. I stood up without a word. If my sister wanted a war, she would get one. I drove home on autopilot, the blood pounding in my ears. My sister did not just want to humiliate me. She wanted to destroy me. When I walked in, Jake was in the living room with Emily, helping her with a drawing. The scene was peaceful, domestic, something my sister would never have. I stood in the doorway, feeling the fury tear through me. This was no longer just a family feud. My sister had made a mistake. She had forced me to strike back. The day dragged on like a heavy shadow. The tension in my body did not ease, and the anger clung to my muscles like a slow poison. But more than anything, it hurt that my mother stayed silent. That emptiness where her support should have been. I slept terribly. I woke up several times during the night, feeling as if someone was watching me from the darkness. It was not fear. It was an invisible truth, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And it came with a phone call. An aunt, speaking in a hushed voice, almost whispering, as if she were about to betray a forbidden secret. My sister had been talking about me, not just slandering me in the family group, talking about Jake. Sweetheart, there is something you need to know. The blood roared in my ears as I listened. Jake was not who I thought he was. My sister had found out by accident months ago. A former associate of her husband mentioned it in a conversation. Jake was not just a regular employee, not an ordinary man, not someone middle class like I had thought. He was a millionaire, not just well off, not just successful, truly rich. The room seemed to shrink around me. My aunt kept talking, but her words became distant, unreal. She said Jake had investments, that he owned a growing company, that he had been making smart moves for years, that he never flaunted his money. And I had no idea. I sat on the edge of the bed, my breath unsteady. The man I lived with, the man I shared my life with, had hidden something so huge from me. Anger hit me first, hot and fierce. Why had he never told me? Did he think I would not understand? That I cared about money? That I would feel inferior to him? And then came another emotion, deeper, pain. I trusted Jake. I trusted that with me he had no masks, that I knew him completely, that our relationship had no secrets. But I had been living a lie. My sister knew before I did. And that detail was what boiled my blood the most. Because now I understood everything. She did not hate me for bringing Jake into the family. She hated me because I had something she never could. It was never about her husband's supposed trauma. It was never about my presence in our parents' house. It was jealousy. I had found love, the kind she destroyed. And now she saw me building something better, something stronger, something she could never take away from me, no matter how much she manipulated. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, feeling my world shift. Jake had lied to me. My sister had declared war on me. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to strike back. The fire of betrayal and anger burned inside me, but I did not let it consume me. Not this time. I would not react the way my sister expected. She wanted me to explode, to feel humiliated, to run to Jake with accusations and questions. But I would not play her game. I spent the day in silence, observing. I looked at Jake with new eyes, searching for any trace of his secret in his every movement. The man I slept next to, the man I shared my life with, was not who I thought he was. But when I saw him with Emily, when he took my hand without even realizing it, when he looked at me with that tenderness so uniquely his, he was still the Jake I loved. That did not mean I was going to let it go. My parents' house was completely silent when I walked in. My sister was sitting on the couch, a glass of wine in her hand, the same arrogant smile as always on her lips. The smile of someone who believed they had won. But this time, no. I stepped forward and dropped my phone onto the table in front of her with a sharp thud. Say it out loud. Her eyebrow arched. What? I picked up my phone and called my aunt. I put it on speaker. Aunt, repeat what you told me this morning. A tense silence filled the room. My parents were there. My brother, too. Everyone was listening. My sister shifted in her seat. Why are you doing this? She murmured, but her tone was no longer confident. My aunt sighed on the other end of the line. Your sister has known that Jake is a millionaire for months. The bomb went off. My mother gasped. My father frowned. My brother looked at me in disbelief. And my sister froze. I smiled. Now she was done for. So what was all this drama about, sister? I asked calmly, crossing my arms. All that talk about your husband's trauma. All that outrage. Her lips trembled. I did not. You were jealous. All eyes were on her. You could not stand that I had something better. That after everything you did, after stealing my husband, after destroying my marriage, I found someone better than you could ever have. She shot up from her seat. You always get everything. Her voice shook. For the first time, it was not arrogant. It was desperate. You are always the victim, the one people protect, the one everyone supports. But no matter what happens, you always end up with the best. A good man, stability, and now money. My mother looked at her in horror. Is that what bothers you? My sister clenched her fists. She had completely lost control of the situation. I took a step closer. You made your choices. You chose to stay with a man who was never worth it. You married him because you wanted to win. My voice dropped a tone. But you never took anything from me. You only freed me from him. The rage disappeared from her face. Now only fear remained. I leaned in slightly. And what hurts you the most is that I did take something from you. Her eyes widened. The illusion that you were above me. A dead silence filled the room. My father was the first to speak. Apologize. My sister blinked, not understanding. What? Apologize. Now. I turned and walked toward the door, giving her one last smile. Thank you for telling me the truth, sister. But next time, be smarter. And I left, leaving her world in ruins.